I highly recommend you Google a document that is called the PBM supply chain. It's a diagram that essentially shows the patient at the bottom. That's you picking up your script. At the top will be the manufacturer. And it should just be maybe a line to the pharmacy and then you, but it's not. There are like 7 or 8 components of parties that are all part of the supply chain of getting that drug to you as the customer. And that is where all the margin is going.
Welcome to Healthcare Liberty Labs with Tiffany Ryder, where we teach you what they don't want you to know about healthcare.
It's interesting. Whenever you talk about this administration, we're in a very polarizing world right now, right? Whether you talk about Biden or Trump, I mean, we saw the numbers. We have half the country very passionate one way, half the country very passionate. What I hope we get to is we're all Americans. And, I say that knowing that I'm not unique in saying that, but what Trump is trying to point to and what has run, and I was pleased to see that it ran in all media with not as much of a negative spin as I see in, when you get different names out there, is Trump signed an executive order with favored nation pricing. And what that essentially was pointing out was if a drug can be sold for less money in another country by a manufacturer, we in the United States should have the exact same opportunity. And it opens the door on a few things. I think, first of all, I don't know that most Americans realize they can get medications much cheaper in other countries, even tier 1 countries like Canada, Israel, UK, and Australia, where they're 70, 80% less in some cases for the exact same drug.
So I think there's two points of confusion there that I hear from patients. One, is it the same drug? Is Canada running some, crazy experiment where they're making it in their, dad's basement and then that's the drug that's cheaper? And it's my understanding the answer is no. As someone who lived overseas and
100% correct. And that's why I said tier 1, because other countries have different laws.
Yep. And then the other point of confusion that, if I'm honest, like I still am confused about, well, what's legal, what isn't legal, what's legal for your doctor to do? Could your doctor send a prescription to a Canadian pharmacy? Maybe not. Can they give it to you? Is it legal for you to fill it? I think patients have a lot of confusion about international sourcing.
The answer is, and I'm going to send you a form for your patients because it's a really easy one and it'll make things, it'll give some pricing.
I love it.
But it's super easy. First of all, for patients listening, all drugs that are offered through tier 1 countries are going to be exactly the same. So who this impacts is, number one, if your employer promotes the program, that's great because that means they're paying the price of the drug and you should get it for free. Or Medicare, Medicaid patients, anybody who is paying a high deductible health plan out of pocket for medications. And, you're looking for savings opportunities. That is where international is an amazing thing. And the government allows today for the personal importation of medications. Today, May 22nd, 2025, there are no tariffs on the importation done of medication personally. So if I, Rachel Strauss, want to get a medication from another country, I have the right. And today, there are no tariffs. I don't know what, we don't know what's going to happen.
Sure.
It is a little crazy in Washington. I'll say that, again, back to my Americans.
There's new news every day.
Now, what I wish Trump would have done, again, to critique what happened in that executive order. Look, I could argue the drugs probably are the same price here in the United States. It's just because of the middlemen, the PBMs, we don't know where all this other margin is going. There are what's called pharmaceutical rebates that, by the way, offset the cost of the medication by 30 to 60%. But the members, the patients, aren't the ones that get those 30 to 60% off. In a great scenario, the employer gets it. Okay, so they're the ones paying the bulk of the drug, but they're not getting that money for sometimes up to 12 months because it takes time for the rebates to make its way through the funnel and the system. And is it exactly 30 to 60% off? We don't get that level of detail at the NDC level. As an employer, groups are typically just getting one lump check, and so they're told it's 30 to 40%. With international, it's immediate. right? And so that's why employers do it, because at the end of the day, like, I would rather have the cash flow savings now than, monkey around with waiting for my rebate, questioning if it's pass through or transparent or whatever. And it's a year later. And
Yeah.
so, but that would almost be like, I buy a TV and there's those rebate stickers that if you fill it out, but I don't get it, Best Buy gets it. Well, how's that fair? I'm the one who paid for it. And that's, kind of where these rebates and so what I wish Trump did, as opposed to just saying if it could be this much in other countries, is really took a look at what is driving the cost of medications in this country. What is, who else profits from the medications being dispensed? And that is where we need reform. And I think pharma is just playing a game that's been allowed to happen here. I don't know. The naivete in me wants to believe that not all pharma is bad. I think they're big business. I think they're billion-dollar businesses. I think they're, most cases, beholden to traders. I myself, in some of my own personal portfolio, invest in pharmaceutical companies because they need to do well. We need to continue to get better and evolve as a society. And we want America, quite honestly, on the forefront of that scientific discovery. But where does it translate into affordability and access to the patient? And that is where I think we've got too many people involved. And, for listeners out there, I highly recommend you Google a document that is called the PBM supply chain, because there is, you can find it by many, many, many companies, but it's a diagram that essentially shows the patient at the bottom. That's you picking up your script. At the top will be the manufacturer who makes the drug. And it should just be maybe a line to the pharmacy and then you. But it's not. There are like 7 or 8 components of parties that are all part of the supply chain of getting that drug to you as the customer. And that is where all the margin is going. And if it was as simple as I made it, we probably would be the same price as other countries. And that's where and I'm sure a lot of it gets into how our lobbying works in this country, how, you can have, what the rules are on advertisements in this country. I don't believe the advertising world, and I'm saying this is without having any background, I'm just guessing, but, I read Vogue, Britain, UK, sometimes at the salons, they'll have the other versions of the magazines. That's how old I am, by the way, for listeners who may be younger. I like paper magazines. I still subscribe to People because I'm in my 40s. I like my People magazine to hold it. But I don't see the ads like I do in this country and other periodicals in other countries. Yes, they still have all the beauties and all the other stuff, but you're just not seeing the same level of and I wonder if that's because it's governed differently. I just don't know.
So for television, especially, the US and New Zealand are the only ones that allow pharmaceutical ads. And, I'm not sure how we ended up exactly in that position, but I do think it has the effect. I think the biggest effect that it has isn't on patients asking their doctors for prescriptions, but actually on being able to control the narrative around all things pharma, which is the insidious, sort of scary part of that. But a couple of things, I want to go back to a couple of things that you mentioned about the executive order. One of the things that I think was brought to my attention for sure in that was that the 4%, we have 4% of the world's population. And you can argue that we take more drugs than any other country because I feel like that has been proven and is true per capita. But in addition to that, that we are essentially funding 75% of the profits. So 4%, our 4% of the world's population is funding 75% of pharma's profits due to the way they're contracting with entities outside of the US and offering better pricing there. I think that maybe there's some work to be done on that, but it's interesting to look at what pricing would look like if it was coming direct from the pharmaceutical manufacturers. One of the things that was in there was that the order establishes a mandate for the HHS secretary to then create a direct to consumer pathway to buy drugs. And what I personally am excited about that piece is that there's really no price transparency, right? So, for no easy price transparency, I tell all of my patients to download GoodRx on their phone just because it gives some sort of idea of pricing between different locations. But there is no easy way for me to, talk to these patients who live in rural America and, didn't go to school for 1,000 years like I did to study medicine, to be able to easily figure out where the heck they're supposed to get their medicines. And, so some of my patients will like go to literally different pharmacies to fill their 20 different medicines because they don't know. So then I was like, well, maybe it's not the easiest, but at least it's something that they can use to like get a benchmark of how much this particular drug costs. So I had a pharmacist on, and she actually was a pharmacist at a small PBM that did end of life care and was doing a lot of the functions that you described, right? Like making sure that the patients weren't on medications that interacted poorly or that weren't indicated for their particular issue, or so there was a lot of actual medicine happening. And I brought up this strategy. I said, well, look, what I tell my patients to do is I say, check the Walmart list, check
She didn't like it, did
GoodRx.
she?
What's that?
She didn't like that idea, did she?
Well, she said, look, maybe that's like for the patients, they have to do what they have to do. So you keep telling your patients to do that because your obligation is to that patient getting the drug that they need.
Right.
And I don't really care what the effect is 5 years down the road. You have to do that. I said, okay, cool. I'm going to keep doing that. But I said, what's your issue? And she, described, because, for example, I use an independent pharmacy because I want to support my local business. I don't want to support CVS. Sorry, CVS. But like, I don't care. So I use an independent pharmacy and I pay cash. And I said, but my pharmacy doesn't take GoodRx. Why? And she got into the story and
PBMs.
starts explaining.
GoodRx is just a consortium of PBMs buying claims and not paying pharmacies.
Yes. So, what are the answers? Because honestly, I don't want to have to go to CVS or Walgreens or any other of these big chains that I'm forgetting the names of, Rite Aid, because I can't talk to my pharmacist. I can't ask a question if my daughter is having some sort of reaction to a medication because they're stressed out. They don't answer the phone. They're understaffed. Like, I don't want to use them just from a customer service and safety perspective. I want to support my independent pharmacist. But the independent pharmacist, it's harder to support them. Like, as easy as that sounds to say out loud, it's a lot harder to figure out how to best do that with all of these other players. So I'm just curious, I don't know.
So to kind of come home and bring this topic, the GoodRxs of the world, how do we help? I think that we need providers like you. I think that it starts with the person who has the pen or the keyboard for the e-script. I think we need access to have how much those medications are. I think that in rural areas where you don't have as much access, I really wish there was more 340B education because, that would keep, have hospitals have those pharmacies in the, in the vicinity. And again, that's a whole 340B. We could do an hour talking for our listeners that they just learned.
And maybe we will at some point.
But, at the end of the day, Tiffany, I think we can kind of wrap with, be consumers. If you are listening to this because you were interested, I think that, the government's interest in PBMs is not that much unlike where the government was interested in, securities 20 years ago, where there was so much attention made for stockbrokers and banks and how much money could be made from our 401k programs. And there was a lot of legislation that went in from a transparency standpoint. That's what we're going to see happen in the pharmacy benefit standpoint. It's just going to I don't talk about my public or my political views very often. I will say I like having a job in this space. I don't believe that it should all be run by the government. I don't believe in the government running every single benefit decision for this country. You made a comment about us having some of the most profits. I also think it's because more people in this country actually have access to a doctor the way we're set up, as opposed to countries that create their own single payer system. I think we have more access in this country as a rule, with employers and people having access to some form of healthcare.
You think
which is
so?
why in some capacity, I do. I hear, from people, just the waiting times to see specialists in other countries.
Yeah.
Again, this is
No, that's interesting. It's an interesting perspective that I wouldn't have thought of, but I think that in some regards, that's true. Look at Canada.
Right.
Where you
Correct.
can wait 18 months to see a neurologist or a rheumatologist.
And so if you're waiting that long, then of course you're not getting the brand drug as fast. And so I just think that some of the margins are skewed just because, and again, we could get into philosophical debates, which is not the point of this. It's more so to say that I believe the government's involvement is necessary, because just like it was in the terms of making sure monopolies couldn't happen, because that is what we're seeing just an abuse of a system to help these large companies grow and not at the benefit of of patient wellness.
This episode brought to you by Crowd Health. Crowd Health helps you find awesome doctors, negotiate your bills, and fund those bills through our peer-to-peer funding platform for less. Welcome to an easier way to pay for healthcare.
It feels like exactly that, like an attempt to completely squash competition with this. You mentioned it earlier, this vertical integration, meaning one entity owns the insurance company that also owns the TPA, that owns the PBM, that owns, you own the whole chain. And then if there's a law that prevents you from doing something naughty in one part of the chain, well, then you just make more money doing nefarious things somewhere else.
It's a whack-a-mole.
It is. It really is. And I think, I think most of my listeners are free market people. I would say a lot of people that listen to the show don't mind if Pfizer makes money. It's just, as long as it's not hurting, people in this country.
Correct.
Disproportionately, if it's actually encouraging innovation of, drugs and other products that we want, and then we have the option to buy them or take them or not, and there is true informed consent with real data. Cool. Make all the money you want, right? I'll buy what I need and I won't buy what I won't need. But no one, I don't think anyone is pleased with the level of deception, the lack of transparency, and just we can feel the whack-a-mole when I'm sitting in a classroom in a pharmacology lecture and I ask, well, how do I find out how much the drug is? And I get a moral lecture. That's a problem. Right? Everyone can sense that things are being hidden. And that's why I wanted to have you on here, right? Because clearly
they are.
There are, there is BS going on, but also the things that you talked about, the functions that you mentioned about having a pharmacist who has the ability to connect data from multiple points, multiple pharmacies to a single patient, and then have something intelligent to tell that patient or their doctor, that actually matters. That's something I want in this world. And but if all the people who are patient advocates are completely anti-PBM and aren't willing to ask the question, then how do we learn that?
Exactly. So it's just, leveraging and continuing to stay on top of it.
Yes. And I appreciate you being willing to come on.
Thank you. I'm thrilled and appreciate the opportunity to talk about something I'm so passionate about.
Yeah. And I will put I'll put all of your stuff in the show notes, but great. I have to tell everyone that I have known Rachel for, 2 years now at least. And I've followed you on LinkedIn and followed your story. But it wasn't until I saw you on TikTok and I was like, oh my God, like she is
I'm
really
trying.
passionate about what she's doing. Like she's
Thank you.
really passionate about the impact she's having. It is clear she is literally trying to make PBM sexy on TikTok and she's kind of doing it.
I
So
mean,
like,
hey.
and not too sexy, don't get excited, but like, like actually talking about it in a way that's, inspiring and made me curious. And so
Thank you.
follow her on TikTok.
I appreciate it. The Rachel Strauss. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Rachel.
This has been the Healthcare Liberty Lab. Thank you to our listeners and our sponsor, Crowd Health, for making this possible. Be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to your podcast, be it Substack, YouTube, Spotify, Apple, or somewhere else. We're glad to have you with us on this mission to rethink healthcare together.